What kind of person calls 911 over a quiet driveway wedding, not knowing she actually hired the planner, making it happen? Yep, Karen booked me, then tried to shut down the event I was running. What happened next? Let's just say the ending wasn't what she expected. The sun was setting in a blaze of orange as I surveyed the scene from my truck. Guests were arriving by the dozen, their laughter and chatter filling the cool air along the tucked-away driveway of the Willow Creek estate. I had spent months planning this wedding, a joyful, personal celebration that transformed an ordinary suburban driveway into a magical venue under the open sky. Every detail had been carefully designed, from the rustic wooden arch festooned with wildflowers to the twinkling string lights overhead, turning the entire area into a wonderland. But just as the final touches were being set, my phone buzzed insistently. It wasn't a congratulatory message from a happy couple or a last-minute tweak from the venue coordinator. It was an emergency alert. I glanced at the screen and couldn't believe my eyes. Karen, the perennial rule enforcer of our community, had dialed 911 on the spot. Her message, terse and outraged, claimed that the wedding was violating HOA guidelines, that the noise and the unauthorized gathering were intolerable disturbances. I couldn't help but laugh quietly. Karen had a history, an obsession, with maintaining perfect order, and here she was, incensed because our relaxed, heartfelt celebration did not conform to her exacting standards. She didn't know that not only was I the wedding planner tasked with organizing this intimate celebration, but I was also the one who had handled every tiny detail from the floral arrangements to the personalized playlists, ensuring that every element met the couple's dreams. In that charged moment, I knew I wasn't going to let her 911 call ruin what we had worked so hard to create. Instead of caving in to her demands, I decided to let our party continue, turning what she intended as a disruption into a moment of unexpected triumph. And trust me, Karen's reaction on the other end of that call would soon spiral into something far more dramatic than a simple complaint. Willow Creek Estates was known for its pristine lawns, uniform houses, and its relentless homeowners association, a body that prided itself on perfection and strict adherence to a rigid set of rules. Within this neatly trimmed world, one figure reigned supreme. Karen Miller, affectionately or infamously known as HOA Karen. Clad always in her sharply tailored suit and armed with a clipboard and smartphone, Karen spent her days prowling the quiet streets, ready to pounce on the slightest breach of protocol. From misaligned garden gnomes to decorations that dare to stand out, nothing escaped her critical eye. I, on the other hand, was known for embracing life's unpredictable beauty. I grew up in this very community, but I always rebelled against its stale uniformity. Instead of following every rule to the letter, I carved out my own path, and as a wedding planner with a reputation for bold, creative design, I transformed ordinary spaces into unforgettable celebrations. My passion was in creating magic from the mundane, turning backyards, driveways, and even community parks into personalized wonderlands where couples could say, "I do," surrounded by heartfelt details that reflected their unique stories. On this particular day, I had been hired by a couple who dreamed of an intimate wedding set against the natural backdrop of Willow Creek's gently rolling landscape. They wanted something raw and sincere, a celebration of love that wasn't confined by stifling traditions. Every element, from the vintage decor to the gourmet food stations, had been curated with care. I envisioned a gathering that would celebrate not only the union of two souls, but also the freedom to defy convention. Unbeknownst to me, Karen had been watching these preparations with growing discontent. In her eyes, our relaxed approach was a chaotic disruption to the orderly world she guarded. So when she noticed our wedding setup along the driveway, an area that she considered off-limits for gatherings, she didn't hesitate. Without consulting anyone or understanding the full context, she saw an opportunity to enforce her version of community order. And then came a 911 call, a move so outlandish that it quickly set social media abuzz and split the community into two distinct camps. Those who applauded our defiant creativity and those who worried it might signal the breakdown of every rule they held dear. The uproar was immediate. As the fire department and local police cautiously responded to the 911 call, a flurry of activity erupted outside the wedding site. I had just finished coordinating the final touches when I noticed uniformed officers arriving, their expressions a mix of confusion and duty. Amid the controlled chaos of shifting vehicles and quick, whispered conversations among the guests, I could see Karen at the edge of the gathering, a figure so intent on enforcing her rules that she would never have imagined the irony of the situation. Inside, my phone buzzed nonstop with calls and messages. Some were from fellow vendors, warning me that Karen was known for going to extreme lengths to enforce the HOA standards. Others were from guests, half amused and half worried that the evening might be derailed by an intervention. I knew I had to act quickly. If Karen believed her complaint would cancel our wedding, I had to prove that our celebration was not only lawful, but a testament to the couple's dreams that were impossible to quash by a single overzealous enforcer. I immediately began posting live updates on social media. I shared short clips showing the setup, the elegantly decorated tables, the lights that twinkled like stars across the open driveway, and in the background, the arriving officers calmly going about their routine. I explained that the wedding was a private event, legally arranged with all the necessary permits, and that Karen's 911 call had been a gross overreaction. Meanwhile, I gathered my closest team of assistants. Together, we reviewed the digital permits, vendor contracts, and the signed documentation from the couple that authorized the use of the space. Everything was in order. The wedding was fully compliant with local laws. I reassured everyone that our work was solid and that this impromptu intervention was about to become a pivotal moment, a moment when logic would triumph over bureaucratic theatrics. Yet, Karen wasn't finished. In a haze of indignation, she began making phone calls of her own, speaking with HOA board members and local officials, her voice rising in pitch as she demanded immediate action to halt the wedding. Her insistence that the gathering was a violation of community peace and aesthetic harmony was met with puzzled looks from the officials, who understood all too well that a driveway wedding was hardly a public disturbance. The tension mounted as the officers, now reassured by the records I presented, decided not to interfere further. Some even stepped aside with polite nods, letting the wedding go on. The community began to buzz. Neighbors watched from their driveways and posted comments online, supporting our stand for creative freedom. Finally, someone standing up to enforce the right to celebrate. Read one post, while another declared, Karen's overreaction is showing exactly what's wrong with these outdated rules. At the heart of the chaos, I could see the couple, radiant and holding hands, gleaming with relief that their special day was not being marred by the antics of a single enforcer. Their joy was a powerful counterpoint to Karen's rigid demands. It was in that moment that I realized this was bigger than just a wedding. It was about challenging an entire system that viewed personal expression as a threat. I reached out privately to a few key community influencers and local legal advisors, encouraging them to prepare a statement of support and to remind everyone that private events, particularly those celebrating love and union, were protected by law. The digital petition against Karen's overreach was gathering momentum, and every shared video clip and news update only strengthened our resolve. By the time the sun began to set, the incident had already transformed into a larger debate over individual rights versus arbitrary authority. The stage was set for the HOA board to address this controversy head-on, and I knew that our final showdown was imminent. I was determined that this would be a watershed moment, one that would finally force the board to acknowledge that creativity, especially in the form of a heartfelt celebration like a wedding, could never be stifled by overzealous enforcement. As the evening progressed, the tension in the community reached a fever pitch. Social media exploded with our story. Live streams, photos, and video clips of the wedding unfolding amid the chaos of Karen's overzealous intervention. Hashtags like hashtag wedding freedom, hashtag no more Karen, and hashtag driveway celebration trended locally as residents from across the neighborhood rallied behind our cause. People who had long been stifled by the stringent rules of the HOA finally found their voices. Local news crews arrived on the scene, capturing the surreal juxtaposition of a joyous wedding happening under a standoff with uniformed officers and a furious Karen directing her ire at a distance. It's unbelievable, one reporter commented on live TV, that a simple driveway wedding could spark such a public uproar. The narrative quickly evolved from a minor nuisance into a bold challenge to the outdated, arbitrary enforcement of neighborhood rules. Inside the HOA board's chambers, the reaction was equally explosive. Emergency meetings were convened, and behind closed doors, heated debates raged among board members. Some insisted that strict adherence to community guidelines was essential to maintain property values and order. Others, however, pointed out that in a diverse community like ours, there was room for individual expression, especially when it came to privately organized events. Leaked minutes from these discussions soon made their way online, revealing the deep divisions and the growing recognition that Karen's actions were undermining the very values the HOA was supposed to protect. I continued to post live updates. Every time my phone captured another sympathetic comment or a supportive hashtag, my resolve strengthened. I recorded interviews with several guests who expressed their delight at the unfolding scene. This is what weddings should be about, celebrating love without restrictions, one guest said enthusiastically, her eyes twinkling with mischief. Another couple, who had once been too intimidated by the HOA's repressive policies, spoke of how this incident had inspired them to pursue their own unconventional celebrations. The response wasn't limited to the digital realm. At a community forum held later that night, residents gathered in small groups at local diners and coffee shops, discussing the incident with a newfound sense of unity. One elderly gentleman famously remarked, "If Karen can't handle a little celebration, then maybe it's time we remind her that community means embracing diversity, not shaming it." The room erupted in laughter and applause, a public acknowledgement that the time for arbitrary fines and undue interference was over. Karen, for her part, was scrambling to salvage her reputation. In a series of frantic social media posts and desperate phone calls to the HOA board, she insisted that her 911 call was made out of a misguided sense of duty, not malice. But every attempt to spin her narrative was undermined by the steady, unwavering flow of evidence and a loud chorus of support from the community. Her authority, once unchallenged, was rapidly crumbling before the eyes of everyone in Cedar Ridge. As the digital petition demanding that the HOA board reform its outdated policies gathered momentum, I received personal messages from local law enforcement and community leaders, reassuring me that the incident would be thoroughly investigated. It became clear that this was not just my battle. It was a watershed moment that could redefine the entire framework of our community governance. The final public hearing was announced for the following morning, a day that promised to be the climax of this unfolding drama. In the hours leading up to the hearing, every shared video, every supportive comment, and every impassioned plea underscored one simple message. Our community would no longer allow personal vendettas to override the rights of residents. The tension was nearly tangible as I locked up my equipment and turned off the cameras, knowing that the next morning, the decision of the HOA board would set the tone for the future of Crescent Meadows. The decisive moment arrived on a cool, clear morning at the Crescent Meadows Community Center. The boardroom was filled with a diverse mix of HOA officials, local law enforcement representatives, community leaders, and hundreds of resolute residents, all gathered for the final public hearing that would determine the fate of our neighborhood's enforcement policies. With a poised yet unyielding demeanor, Councilwoman Elaine Rodriguez stepped up to the podium, her eyes reflecting the united determination of a community that had grown weary of arbitrary interference. After an exhaustive review of all digital evidence, including live footage from the event, detailed records of complaints, and heartfelt testimonies from our residents, we have reached an inescapable conclusion. Councilwoman Rodriguez began, her voice resonating with authority. It is abundantly clear that the actions taken by Mrs. Karen Miller, specifically her ill-conceived 911 call in response to what was nothing more than a private, lovingly planned driveway wedding, were driven not by genuine concern for safety, but by personal bias and a willful abuse of power. Our community's right to celebrate and express individuality must be protected at all costs. A weighted silence fell over the room as Rodriguez continued. Effective immediately, the HOA board will rescind all sanctions and fines levied in connection with this incident, and we will initiate a comprehensive review of our policies to ensure that the rights of every resident to host private events are unequivocally safeguarded. Today's decision is a resounding declaration that our community values innovation and personal freedom over arbitrary rule enforcement. Her words were met with a swell of approving murmurs and a resounding round of applause. At that critical moment, a distinguished community advocate, a pillar of our neighborhood known for defending individual rights, rose to speak. "Today we stand united," he declared, his voice bold and impassioned. "No one in our community should be subjected to the tyranny of overzealous enforcers who mistake personal vendettas for civic duty. Let this vote be the turning point, a clear signal that Crescent Meadows will always protect its residents' right to celebrate life in all its joyous diversity. We demand accountability, and we will not rest until every violation of our freedom is met with unwavering resolve." His declaration was embraced by the assembled crowd, amplifying the unified call for change. Following his address, a senior official from the local public safety department presented the final dossier, a meticulously compiled record of all digital evidence, eyewitness testimonies, and official reports confirming that the wedding was a lawful private event and that the 911 call was nothing more than an overreaction. The evidence was irrefutable, and the internal review panel unanimously endorsed stringent disciplinary measures against any individual who abused their power for personal gain. Councilwoman Rodriguez concluded, "Let this resolution mark the dawn of a new era for Crescent Meadows, a community where every resident's rights are inviolable and public authority is exercised solely for the common good." Our vote today is not just about reversing an isolated incident. It is a resounding declaration that we will always protect our freedom to celebrate life's moments, no matter how unconventional they may be. Her final words, delivered with unwavering conviction, sealed the turning point in our struggle for creative freedom and property rights. In that defining moment, as every face in the boardroom shone with determination and hope, the balance of power shifted irrevocably. The overwhelming digital evidence and a unified voice of our community forced the HOA board to take decisive action, a turning point that would forever reshape the governance of Crescent Meadows. The days of petty interference and arbitrary fines were over, and a future built on respect for individual expression was finally within our grasp. In the weeks that followed the monumental vote, Crescent Meadows experienced a transformation that resonated far beyond the boardroom. News of the rescinded fines and the sweeping reforms implemented by the HOA board spread rapidly through local media and social networks, sparking fervent debates about property rights, creative freedom, and the importance of protecting our private celebrations. Editorials in the local newspaper, with headlines like "A New Dawn for Crescent Meadows" and "Community United for Joy and Freedom," celebrated the decisive action taken to safeguard every resident's right to host their own events without arbitrary interference. Hashtags such as hashtag property rights, hashtag no more Karen, and hashtag celebrate freely trended widely, reinforcing our collective determination to stand up against overreach. Town hall meetings and community forums saw record attendance as residents gathered to share their experiences and to envision a future where individuality was embraced and celebrated. Neighbors, once intimidated by the stifling control of the HOA, now spoke confidently of their right to live, work, and celebrate on their own terms. Our communities are built on the spirit of creativity and unity, one impassioned resident declared at a bustling meeting, his voice resonating with hope. The atmosphere was charged with optimism, a promise that Crescent Meadows would forever protect its residents' freedom to express themselves. Within the reformed HOA board and local public safety departments, swift and decisive changes were implemented. Senior officials, led by Director James Carter and Lieutenant Marcus Reed, launched comprehensive training programs focusing on ethical governance, cultural sensitivity, and the preservation of individual rights. Regular internal audits and transparent disciplinary processes were established to ensure that every complaint was examined without bias, and that no resident would ever again be subject to arbitrary fines or intrusive enforcement. Our duty is to uphold the rights and dignity of every member of our community, Lieutenant Reed affirmed at a subsequent press conference, his words underscoring our renewed commitment to justice and fairness. Community leaders and local civil rights organizations also mobilized vigorously. They organized workshops, public forums, and educational campaigns aimed at empowering residents to defend their rights and to foster a culture where artistic and personal expression were celebrated, not penalized. When we come together, no one can suppress our voice, a local activist proclaimed at a town hall meeting, inspiring residents to unite in pursuit of a more inclusive and equitable Crescent Meadows. For me, the journey from confrontation to resolution was as personal as it was transformative. My decision to take a stand, a decision born from an unexpected 911 call that sought to shut down a heartfelt celebration, had not only restored my right as a wedding planner to orchestrate unforgettable moments, but it had also ignited a broader movement. Neighbors who had long endured the tyranny of rigid rules now found the courage to speak out, sharing their own stories of resilience and creative defiance. The digital evidence that documented our struggle became a rallying cry for every resident who believed that our private celebrations and property rights were sacred. Karen Miller, once the formidable enforcer of the HOA's draconian rules, was now reduced to a cautionary tale, a vivid reminder that no one is above accountability when the community unites for truth. Her influence rapidly waned as digital records of her past transgressions circulated widely, underscoring the urgent need for reform and the dangers of unchecked authority. At a final celebratory event held in the Central Park of Crescent Meadows, residents, local officials, and community advocates gathered under the gentle glow of the setting sun. A large banner reading "Unity, Freedom, and Celebration" was unfurled between majestic oaks, and heartfelt speeches filled the air with promises of a brighter, more inclusive future. Today, we celebrate the triumph of our rights over petty interference, a victory for every resident who dares to dream and celebrate on their own terms, Councilwoman Rodriguez proclaimed, her voice filled with resolute pride. The standing ovation that followed was a powerful affirmation of our shared commitment to protect our freedoms and to ensure that creativity remains a cornerstone of our community. As every new day dawned over Crescent Meadows, the legacy of that fateful confrontation endured as a beacon of transformative change. The story of how Karen called 911 over a driveway wedding, unaware that she had hired me as the planner, and how our celebration went on to triumph against arbitrary interference became a rallying cry for every resident. Every sunrise now carried with it the promise that in Crescent Meadows, truth, creativity, and the right to celebrate freely would forever prevail. In the end, what began as a personal dispute evolved into a watershed moment for our entire community. We emerged more united, more vigilant, and more determined to safeguard our rights against any form of bureaucratic overreach. And as the sun rose each morning over our reclaimed neighborhood, it carried with it the promise that Crescent Meadows would always be a place where freedom, artistry, and respect for individual expression shone brighter than any rule could ever dim.